But now another nail in the coffin of democracy and in the coffin of journalism, like keeping us informed as opposed to being, quote, informed by weird conspiracy theories and whatnot, is happening right in front of us. Yosef Geachew is with us. He is the director of the Common Cause's Media and Democracy Program. CommonCause.org, of course, is the website. Geachew, Geachew 2 is his Twitter handle. Yosef, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
It's nice talking to you again. It's been quite a while. So tell me what's happening to our print news business right now.
Sure. So yesterday we got official announcement from Gatehouse Media and Gannett Company that they were entering into an acquisition to become one entity. So Gatehouse will be acquiring Gannett for $1.4 billion. Gatehouse is currently the second largest newspaper chain, and Gannett is the first largest newspaper chain. So combining these two entities is going to create not only the largest newspaper chain in the country, but an unprecedented newspaper chain conglomerate where they'll control 1 in every 6 publications, have control over 100 local newspapers, and several national news outlets as well.
How many cities are there in America of, say over 30,000 people? I mean, it's got to be, what, maybe 150 at the most?
It's quite a lot. I mean, these are two significantly large newspaper chains. Gannett currently owns 100 local newspapers and nearly 1,000 weekly newspapers in about 43 states. And I think Gatehouse currently operates in 31 states. So these are two significantly large newspaper chains. They have a lot of different outlets where they have control over the news and information and what people are getting every day when it comes to local news and national news.
Right. Now, back in the 70s, the Supreme Court in the, if I'm doing this from memory, I may be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it was the Sylvania case, adopted Robert Bork's theory of antitrust, that prior to this Supreme Court decision and prior to Bork selling this for over a decade, the Sherman Antitrust Act was interpreted to mean that if a trust or a monopoly or a company gets so large that it diminishes competition, that's a bad thing, and therefore they should be broken up. If it gets so large that it no longer serves the community, that's a bad thing, it should be broken up. If it gets so large that it damages the ability of the industry to function and innovate, which is, kind of a subset of competition, I suppose, that's a bad thing and it should be broken up. If it gets so big that it has substantial enough political power to basically eliminate any possibility of regulation of itself, then it has reached that threshold and it's worth breaking up. Bork argued none of those things should matter. The only thing that should matter is whether the consumer pays more money or less money. And I'm guessing that they're selling this based on we'll have economies of scale, we'll be able to keep these newspapers going, we'll be able to serve these communities without raising prices.
Right. So the rationale is that once they combine and merge into one huge media conglomerate, they'll be able to create synergies through cost cutting.
Right.
Gatehouse is actually a private equity firm by nature, and they've had a history of actually cutting costs, which comes in the form of laying off reporters and consolidating newsrooms or newsroom functions. We're actually currently facing a major crisis in journalism where reporters are getting laid off every day. In the past several months alone, we've had about 3,000 journalists lose their jobs. This is one of the few industries that is actually on the decline when it comes to employment versus other areas where they're seeing higher rates of employment. And this is in large part because of the massive waves of consolidation that's happening right now. There have been other mergers that are either pending at the Federal Communications Commission or mergers that have gone through in the past couple of years. And with every merger, what we've seen is reporters get laid off, newsroom functions get consolidated or shuttered. And ultimately, it's the communities that pay the price because they don't get the quality news and information anymore, particularly at the local level. I mentioned that Gannett owns 100 local newspapers. These communities rely on local news to see what's going on in their state legislature, their town hall, their housing authority, their school board. These are really important functions of democracy that people need to know to make informed decisions about our government. And it's really the quality of our news that's going to significantly diminish or disappear through transactions such as Gannett Gatehouse.
Yeah. One of the principal reason why the First Amendment specifically mentions the press, the freedom of the press shall not be infringed, goes back to a number of the founders. Jefferson was the most outspoken about this, and he hated the newspapers because they were going after him for all kinds of things. But he absolutely believed that without a free press, you can't have a functioning democracy. How do we have this is my biggest concern, Yosef, how do we have a, quote, free press, or an independent, free and independent, I think was the phrase that Jefferson used. How do we have a free and independent press when all these newspapers all across the country are owned by one group that has their own, political interests, their own worldview, their own perspective? I would be very surprised if a multi-billion-dollar company were going to start editorializing against tax cuts for multi-billion-dollar corporations, for example. What happens to our democracy? Is this measurable, what this has done to our democracy?
I mean, I think it's measurable today with the amount of civic engagement we're seeing. But voting rates, voter turnout isn't as high as it once was, particularly at the state and local levels. This is likely in large part because of the amount of diverse sources of news and information we're getting. We're getting more and more polarized. We're getting misinformation and disinformation because we don't have as many trusted sources of news, which are particularly at the local level, where people really come to know their local broadcasters or who's been running their newspapers for quite some time. And so we can actually measure some of these harms right now, and they're likely to get much worse down the line if we keep consolidating and consolidating. We have the Sinclairs of the world, which are quite clear in forcing their local anchors to air these must-run content segments, using their trusted local broadcasters to kind of serve as a corporate mouthpiece.
Let's be clear, for right-wing rants.
Yes, for right-wing rants, which are typically xenophobic, racist, or pro-Trump segments that don't necessarily reflect the views of the communities that those stations are operating in.
Right.
This is a business model that can be easily copied from other news conglomerates. And the problem is when you keep consolidating and you give one entity significant control over what we see, what we hear, and what we read, then we run into these problems where we're not getting the news and information we need to make informed decisions about our democracy. We could be getting pro-corporate sources of news. We could be getting sources of news that are filled with misinformation or disinformation. And these are really significant dangers.
So Yosef, forgive my interrupting. We're going to hit a break here shortly. I'm assuming that the Trump administration doesn't have much of a problem with this. I mean, the great consolidation happened in '82 when Reagan stopped enforcing what was left of the antitrust laws after the Supreme Court took a whack to them. Is there any way to push back on this? Is there, what's going on with this?
So, I mean, when it comes to this particular transaction, I believe the Department of Justice will be taking a look at this for the competitive impacts. Right. I don't know exactly how the agency will rule this, but I think there are some actual competitive harms when it comes to how much control one entity will have, even if they're not competing in there's not loss of competition in head-to-head markets. There's still one entity owning large amounts of newspaper chains in regions, and what we've seen when one entity owns a lot of news outlets in nearby regions is that they start cost-cutting. And so you have communities in neighboring regions getting the same types of news and information that's not actually relevant to their community. There's studies out there that show that communities are more likely to get information about another city or another town other than the town that they currently live in. So what is the point of local news if it's not local, if it's not focused on local voices and local stories and issues that actually impact that community? And that's the danger with this type of merger. Yeah.
I'm a big advocate of laws requiring local media, to be entirely locally owned, right. Whether it's radio, television, or newspapers. And there are no such laws any longer. There used to be, at least with regard to radio and TV.